What an awesome room. It reminds me of that, that thing my mom told me once. Just remember, you're unique, just like everyone else. And this whole room, full of unusual people, unusual stories, and just really honored to be here. So thank you, Dr. G. Life purpose. A lot of us still continue every day to ask ourselves the question, like, what is my purpose here? And my story began in Montana. This is a place of continual change and evolution. And back in the green button, right? I was always in search of heroes, real life heroes. I was always gathering all the kids in our neighborhoods, and this was my first example of a hero. It was my mom, a single parent mom, only child, put herself through her family's first college degree, working several jobs at once. And for a while there in government housing, every house that we lived in was just condemned and bulldozed for about 3 or 4 years. We just like stand outside and watch them kind of crush these homes and move on to the next one. One time this neighbor came over and took a photograph of us. And I remember looking at that just kind of fascinated, like, I wonder how that thing works. And a few weeks later, my mom noticed that I was curious about this camera and stitched together enough money to buy me my first, and I spent a lot of time with that camera. I documented the shortcuts at school and documented the crosswalk guards, and I eventually turned that passion into a profession and graduated film school and did a whole bunch of commercials and won a bunch of regional awards in the Northwest, and figured it was about time that I moved to Hollywood. So, big city, bright lights, and the epicenter of creative geniuses, right? Epicenter of creative genius. And I want to be a big-time Hollywood director, an action movie director, maybe not action, but just big-time director, right? Or not. Get some coffee for the director. So I'm there for about a year and a half, getting coffee, taking out trash, and it requires a little bit of a perspective shift. And I thought to myself, I'm not just going to be a production assistant. I want to be an undercover ninja. I'm going to be the best production assistant there is. And so as I'm taking out the trash, I'm also taking photographs. And at the end of every day, I'm handing out these photographs to the crew, to the gaffer, the grips, and as these little gifts. And you're like, that was earlier, thank you. Why? And I made an impression. And pretty soon I was working for Michael Bay and Alan Davio, who was a cinematographer who did E.T. and Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and I was just like, man. And the cool thing about being an undercover ninja is that you can be invisible. And I was standing next to them at any chance I could, just having, like, overhearing the conversations, just like leaning in. They almost never noticed me, right? One day we're on top of a skyscraper in Los Angeles, and this crane's like looking over the top, and this guy's got suction cups, and he's coming up, and this F1 fighter jet goes by on a Ferrari, and like all in like a second and a half window. I'm like leaning between the two of them. I'm like, holy shit. He's like, what? Michael turns around, like, oh, not invisible. That was amazing. Like all of that, and he's like, you're fired. But I'm like the best production assistant you have. Yeah, I saw your director's reel. You should be doing that. Just go on and do that, beat it. So I did what any Montana kid would do. I started doing rap videos. Bowden Thugs and Harmony, Jody Wiley, Rakim, and honestly, like, I didn't go seeking these out. He just, like, the first one happened, and pretty soon, like, oh, that's what he does. Like, I'm like, but I don't do those. It didn't matter. I was doing a series of them, and so it was an interesting time of life. But I remember at this Hollywood Hills party, everyone just looked the same, and everyone had the same story, and I was looking around the room, and I walked outside, and I was leaning against this railing, and I was just like, whoa, where are they? Who? Whoa, where'd you come from? This guy next to me just pops in the middle of nowhere, right? And I started talking to him. I'm like, my name's Yarrow. He's like, hey, Czechoslovakian composer teaching deaf kids how to read and play music. I'm like, man, that's like the coolest story I've ever heard. Does it work? How, is it just for the enjoyment of others, or can they actually feel the resonance? Like, tell me more about the mechanism, the feedback of this. And so we had this really long conversation. I went to sleep that night just kind of pondering this, what a beautiful story. And the very next day, I met a scientist from Helsinki who is piecing the ozone layer back together. So this is 1999. I'm like, how do you patch a hole? You're like saving the world. is it working? He's like, we're getting there. I'm like, oh, thank God. You're like a real-life superhero. And every day for the next 2 weeks, I would meet interesting stories. The person bagging my groceries who donates time at the local soup kitchen afterwards. And I'd just go home at night and just think about these amazing, it's like, wow, you ask the universe and poof, it answers. So one night I'm lying in bed, looking at the back of my eyelids, just recounting these stories, like one after the other, after another, after another. And I sat up in bed and was like, they're everywhere. There's secret society of real-life superheroes all around us in the most unexpected places, right? Doctors and physicists and teachers and composers. And so I wanted to go find them. I wanted to go find them and connect them together because they all have these incredible powers, these incredible gifts to offer. And what if we could provide a platform for kids that weren't just athletes and entertainers, but were people like you in this room? People doing everyday work, but shift the perspective a little bit. And it's also kind of challenging to attempt the audacious and the impossible, the improbable. It's like pushing the rock up the mountain, right? But when there's someone right over here in the next trench doing the same thing, it's like, whew, all right, I'm not alone. And you start stitching them together, right? So this is before social media. This is 1999, 2000, 2001. And I just had this realization that there exist ordinary people that have extraordinary powers all around us. But the true key for that is to ask yourself what that power is within you, right? The badges. What's your superpower? I was really delighted to see that. Obviously, I resonate with this. Look within. Like, untap that superhero within. And so our whole premise was we're going to go find as many people as we possibly can who are already doing amazing things and a bunch of people who are not yet doing amazing things and make sure that they understand that they have this capacity within them. And we started with kids. And very simple question, like, what makes you super? What's your real-life superhero power? And it was amazing, like, the whole process of not only what's your real power, but, like, what are your weaknesses? And, like, how do you keep a sense of humor around, like, define it. But once you define it, then it no longer owns you, right? It's like, okay, ADD, I got it. Let's write a story around that. Let's put a little twist on it. What we didn't see coming was this empowerment. Once these kids would start to define their special power, their real-life superpower, they're instantly starting to manifest that best super self. And we would start kind of tracking these stories over the course of 2 years, 3 years, and it was just crazy. We started getting these kids were just so, owning it. And we started getting letters from teachers and child psychologists, and hey, can we use this profile that you're using to get to know our kids? And because if given that kind of avatar, that mask to answer through, suddenly there's a lot of brutal honesty. You can start tracking, where there's violence at home and just unexpected things that we had no idea that was coming. So the way the game worked is you made your card. That's one of my nemesis. Only you can defeat you, right? So you play your hero and your nemesis. And we did a whole stay-in-school program with Shaquille O'Neal, which doesn't hurt with the street cred when you're walking into a school with Shaq. And yeah, they're like listening. We have your attention now. And the nemesis, you play your card and you go online, you play these games, you gather these points called knowledge nuggets, which was a digital currency. And the more knowledge that you'd feed your character, this was kind of joining, once your card was made, you go join the hero universe. And we incentivized through these different phases this thing called the karma counter, which worked like a stock exchange. So the higher you rise up the karma counter, the more fame you had the ability to get. Like your card would go into a trading card deck. You potentially might even end up on a TV show as a guest animated hero that we had in development with Warner Brothers. But I thought what went really cool was once we knew we had these kids hooked with the games, there would be a prompt at like level 2. How do you save the world? Start with where you are. Type in your zip code. So kids would type in their zip code, and they're given 10 things they can do within a 5-mile radius where they live to literally go make the world a better place, right in their own backyard. And walking dogs through the local humane society or park reclamations, neighborhood cleanups, and they'd show up on a Saturday, I'm yours, for all day. And they're like, wow, what an amazing young girl you are. I'm impressed. And they're like, well, thanks. And then they get home, there's 100,000 knowledge nuggets waiting for them. They're like, light bulb goes off. I could play video games for a month and not get that kind of knowledge nugget boost, right? So we started pushing people out into their communities 10.5 billion knowledge nuggets in 1 year. It was incredible. And like, it was that moment where I was like, wow, how lucky am I? I've like found a life purpose. It was like, I think that this is what I'm here for. And just pushing this groundswell of gamified good under one premise, be your own superhero. And it wasn't around comic books. You know, people were like, well, you must have been a comic book junkie. And no, I'm a people junkie. I like people. I like heroes. And people noticed. We got an acquisition offer from Fox, and our investors were thrilled. Most of our team was thrilled. I was not thrilled. I felt like we were just getting started. And I also had no longer voting control interest. So we were acquired. And within 2 weeks of like that whole ramp down and me walking through the office for the last couple times and like looking at all the designers and like all this was like no longer my thing. You know, it became someone else's thing. So they bought it, they wrapped it into a purchase with MySpace, kind of rummaged through the hood, took a bunch of our social media tools that we had developed, and we were like one of the first face croppers up, you know, online that we had invented, and like all these little things, but they're like, what's this nonprofit part of the volunteer thing? Like, eh. And they basically just ended up shelving it. So I went back to Montana for a 2-week vacation, sat there, just trying to figure out like what was next. Like, wow, can't believe I just like, my purpose was completely just, and then I realized they bought a brand. They didn't buy the purpose. They can't purchase purpose. So it was a reinvention. It was another time to shift perspective. And that's when I thought to myself, what doesn't exist right now? Well, a mentorship platform. A mentorship platform where people from all ages and disciplines and minds can come together and exchange knowledge, very much like Gautam was mentioning, Oscar-winning filmmakers, Grammy-winning musicians, designers from NASA, people like Christian Long, who's here in the audience. And when you put this people together, a lot of really amazing things can happen, right? It's this curation, this ecosystem of hackers and disruptors and students. And so I really thrive on a couple things. Curation. My email signature says creative alchemist, because I believe when you can put the right ingredients together, there's a combustion that can occur, right? So I was asked earlier, like, what are your curation like philosophies? And like one of them is intention. So you find people that are actually doing something positive in the world, and you put enough of those together, and there's a whole amplification, right? But it starts with, Peter mentioned this. How do you hatch a better world? Optimize self, right? Self, culture and community, and world. And those ripples we create travel farther than we know. The friendly note that you say to someone in the elevator, or just all those ripples you put out into the world, they travel much farther than we know. But the amplification, it's like funny math. 1 + 1 = 11, right? There's an exponential impact there. And you put the right ingredients together, you can start creating a lot of really interesting things. So for instance, you know, Gautam mentioned, because of Hatch stories, NASA designer meets architect at Hatch, and together they create pop-up disaster relief housing for developing countries. Or a composer meets a game designer, and they make a game to how to create critical thinking skills through development of how do you compose without ever having had a music lesson. Just really unexpected things because of the different minds, disciplines, industries, generations. That cross-pollination is kind of a mantra of mine. So now we're putting together 13 years of Hatch, 5,000 people in this network, and we're activating the network in different ways. We do these things called Hatch Labs. For instance, last year we went to a Fortune 500 company that happens to be the largest game designer in the world, or game company in the world, and they said, we want to hire you to come in and do a lab for us to optimize innovation. I'm like, okay, that sounds like it could probably be very useful for you. A little boring for us. We have an agenda too. He was like, what's the agenda for you? I'm like, well, how about you think about designing or dedicating a whole arm of your company to designing critical thinking like tools for kids that aren't just toys that are licensed from Disney, Mattel, and plastic injected molded toys, but actually learning tools to develop future leaders. This is our future right here, right? And you're putting the world's largest distribution channel into their hands. This is an opportunity. So it was an amazing lab, 2-day, very intensive lab. 90% of our insights that we daylighted in a 30-page white paper that followed up were implemented. They did a whole town hall meeting globally. It was really beautiful. So uniting to connect as one, that's us here, right? And the more of these gatherings that can happen, and I'm really pleased to hear Gautam talk about scaling. I've been doing a lot of thinking about this as well. I feel like we're in this race between consciousness and catastrophe. And the more of these gatherings, that we can put together, but as you said also, we need action after them, right? We need continual action. We need to provide tools and ways in which we can converge after this. We're developing a platform which is a little bit like a 3.0 version of the platform that we created with the Hero project, that's going to hopefully help facilitate that and continue to offer ways for everyone in this room to collaborate going forward. So this was just 2 weeks ago. This is 150 people in Montana, and uniting and connecting as one to hatch a better world. And I think that, we have a chance. We stand a chance. Buckminster Fuller, one of my favorite philosophers, had this theory about the trim tab. And the larger the rudder to build, to turn a larger ship, at a certain point in time it becomes useless because it's too much surface area. So the trim tab is that tiny little tab on the edge of a big rudder that can help shift the long arc of a huge vessel. I think that each of us can be these trim tabs in large organizations, Trojan horse style, right? We can go in to large corporations and as a little gift, we pop open out the back and paratroop in ninjas and help shift that long arc. So I was asked what the metrics of Hatch were a few years ago, and this was before I spoke nonprofit lingo. So I was like, man, metrics of, like, it's a nonprofit. You're like, yeah, but like, I get asked for money every single day. When I open up the mailbox, I know exactly that $25 impacts this many kids, and I'm like, oh, I get you, okay. So how many people, let's see, there's a concert. I'm like, wait a minute, what are the metrics of John Lennon, right? The impact of one can inspire the lives of millions. What are the metrics of Da Vinci? Come on, like one, right? The impact of one. So I'm just gonna read this because this is each of us right here in this room. One line grows into art, one brick becomes a building, one flame ignites a blaze, one tree can birth a forest, one candle illuminates darkness, one star can guide a ship at sea, one door opened can determine destiny, one kind word can transform a life path, one note can build a symphony, one song spark a movement, one step begin a journey, one voice can alter history, one idea can save lives. It begins with creativity, the inspiration of one impacts the lives of millions. Who's next? So that's us. Thank you.